Hello and welcome to the second ever video on the Oaf Culture channel. I am Handsome Oaf and this is where I come to discuss pop culture news, opinions, and products. Today is a special day because this is episode 1 of Essential Reading, where I review a comic that is considered by many to be a must-read story, but I haven't read it before. I'm looking forward to doing many more of these, but we gotta start with number 1. Today we are looking at Batman Volume 1, number 251, The Joker's Five-Way Revenge. In this landmark story, originally published in 1973, the Joker returns after a years-long hiatus from appearing in comics. This story reintroduced the sadistic, murderous Joker, who Bill Finger had written originally. In the 50s and 60s, he had become more harmless and goofy.
10,000.
15,000.
2 bits. Thought I'd lighten the mood.
While I think it's important to never downplay the artistic merit of the more lighthearted Batman content we've had over the years since 1939, I can say that I prefer to read about the vile and villainous Joker more than the playful and silly version. The more serious one is a more compelling character, because there is more for the reader to desire to understand. In this story, the Joker escapes from what we would now refer to as Arkham Asylum, intent on murdering 5 former members of his gang. He knows that one of them betrayed him to assist in his capture, and he has vowed to kill all 5 of them in order to make sure that he takes revenge on the culprit. Batman is smart enough to realize Joker's plan after the first death, noticing the obvious connection between the Joker and the first of the 5 gang members, and guessing his motive. However, Batman must race against time to attempt to save as many of the gang members as he can, and apprehend the Joker once more. Based on my experience, I would say this comic is fun to read, even though it's definitely cheesier and not as serious as more modern comics. With that being said, really it's best to view the story as a product of its time and appreciate the task that writer Denny O'Neil and artist Neil Adams were taking on. Here's the late great Denny O'Neil.
For a year or more, he was this kind of naughty guy who bopped around the streets of Gotham. And I thought, if you throw that out, you've got a terrific character.
As a writer, Denny O'Neil was restoring the character of the Joker to how he was originally portrayed years before. Instead of simply providing a laugh here and there, the Joker was becoming, once again, a character to be feared.
Hello, Gotham. Joker's back in town.
This was part of how Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams started to change Batman's image prior to Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns, which swung the pendulum so far opposite of being campy that eventually we had to reach the tone of modern Batman. Comics were still geared toward younger readers much more than they are today. This story is still more lighthearted than a modern Batman comic. Also, this comic story takes one issue to be told. There was much less of a barrier to entry into the comic world than there is today. You can see this with the story through its only being 1 issue long, and the amount of explanation they give throughout. As you can see, based on the amount of thought bubbles on the pages, if nothing else, Batman tells the reader what he is thinking and why he's coming to certain conclusions quite often. We get a window into his mind to see why he does whatever he does next. If this was a modern comic, I might expect to be shown a little less, or maybe not walked through the process quite so thoroughly. An artistic decision you could make if you were creating this page would be perhaps to have no thought bubbles at all, and just let the reader have to watch the actions that are taking place in order to understand what's going on. Of course, what they did here and what might be done today and what I might do, none of it's right or wrong. I'm just making an observation and showing how they tried to make it easy for young readers to jump in and read about Batman. And that's different from how it quite often is today. You can go into your local comic shop if you still have one, take a book off the shelf, and the writers will say, "Hey, sink or swim, my guy." So thus far in our discussion, we can see that this is the Joker's first comic back after his hiatus. There is a more mature tone than when readers had last seen him. However, since this comic is still a product of its time and the status quo that existed throughout the comic industry, we can see that this story isn't quite as cerebral as modern comics can often be today. Keeping all that we've looked at so far in mind, I have one critique about this story. Batman gets nerfed from how we know him to be today. He's not as smart, which can be seen when he's too trusting of criminals and when he doesn't quite know what to make of a clue for a little while. As a modern-day goon, I don't think Batman would ever turn his back on a criminal, as he does here. I think we can infer that this detail is not only a product of the time, but, much like today because it still happens, it's a tool to create some conflict for the character. However, it can't be ignored that they managed to explain it well in context. Batman believes that Bigger Melvin understands that he needs to be worried about the Joker, and that Batman is his only chance at survival. Bigger Melvin is just a moron and doesn't believe him, already having committed a crime very recently and thinking that Batman is trying to trick him into going to jail for it. The Batman live-action TV show starring Adam West had been canceled several years prior, but Super Friends premiered on ABC 3 days after this comic released. So when I say it's a product of its time, that can give you an idea of the time that I'm referring to. It's easy nowadays to think of those two shows as pretty cheesy, but hear me out. On both of those TV shows, and still to this day in modern Batman content, there are many times where Batman has made a mistake or gotten in over his head, and we think, I don't think you would really do that, Batman. So, should we really hold this little thing against Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams? Probably not. Now, onto that clue I mentioned. There's a time in this story where I think the real Batman would have come to a conclusion much quicker about this clue than he did in this story. But we can overlook this because it keeps the audience involved in the story. They get to wonder about it until later instead of Batman just immediately knowing and getting to solve the case. It might have been less fun that way. Of course, I always think you can make the argument that you can have a compelling story without having to compromise important details about a character in order to give them a conflict. However, like I said, you can make that argument about just about any story we see even in the modern day. So is it really a big deal? No, I don't think so. Just something that I noticed and I think you would notice as well. The last element of this comic I'm going to cover is the artwork. I don't know what else to say about it other than it's great, it's vibrant, it's iconic. You really can't go wrong with Neil Adams. So now the moment we've all been waiting for. Do I recommend reading The Joker's 5-Way Revenge? Overall, if you're a big Batman fan today, this story will probably not knock your socks off. We have to appreciate, though, what a welcome change it must have been in 1973. The characterization of the Joker reflects where he has ended up in the modern day. Logically, though, if you're thinking of reading this story, it's only one issue long, so why not? All attempts at sounding smart aside, I really enjoyed reading this comic, and I think you will too. Thank you for tuning in to the first episode of Essential Reading. I'm Handsome Oaf, and this is Oaf Culture. You can like or comment or subscribe if you feel so inclined, but your viewership is quite enough for me. I appreciate you being here, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.